What if the world's richest country suddenly couldn't pay its bills? Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly the risk behind America's debt ceiling crisis. A political game of chicken that could blow up the global financial system. Your savings, your mortgage, even your grocery bill could all be on the line. So let's break down what the debt ceiling really is, why it matters to you in the UK, Canada, and Australia, and what could happen if this ticking time bomb finally goes off. The US government spends money on everything from social security checks and military salaries to hospital, infrastructure, and foreign aid. To cover all this, it borrows money by issuing treasury bonds. Investors around the world, banks, pension funds, even foreign governments, buy these bonds because they trust America will always pay them back. The debt ceiling is the legal cap on how much the US can borrow. Think of it as a credit card limit for the entire country. But unlike your credit card, where the bank sets the limit, in America, the politicians set their own. And they've turned it into a weapon. Every time the ceiling is reached, Congress has to vote to raise or suspend it. Most of the time, they eventually do. But each time, one side tries to use the moment as leverage to force spending cuts, tax changes, or political win. It's like playing chicken with the global economy. Now, here's the scary part. If the ceiling isn't raised in time, the US runs out of money to pay all its bills. Someone somewhere doesn't get paid. That could mean a delay in social security checks, missed military pay, hospitals not reimbursed by Medicare, or, in the worst case, missed payments to bondholders. That last one is the big red button, a default on US debt. If you think that's just a theoretical risk, think again. In 1979, a technical glitch combined with political dysfunction caused the Treasury to briefly miss some payments. It wasn't a true default, but even that tiny hiccup sent borrowing costs up and shook investor confidence. Fast forward to 2011, and the showdown got much closer. The fight dragged on so long that Standard & Poor's downgraded America's credit rating for the first time ever. Stock markets dropped, borrowing costs rose, and faith in US leadership took a serious hit. And that was just a near miss. Imagine what happens if the US actually defaults. So let's imagine it. On day one, the Treasury has to prioritize. Do they pay bondholders to avoid default, or do they pay citizens their benefits? Either way, millions of people are left unpaid. If they skip bondholders, it's an official default. Global investors, from Canadian pension funds to European central banks to ordinary Australians holding retirement accounts, would suddenly learn that US treasuries aren't 100% safe. The so-called risk-free asset of the world would lose its reputation overnight. Confidence would shatter. Why does that matter so much? Because the US dollar and US treasuries are the bedrock of global finance. Every country, every big bank, every major investor relies on them. Oil is priced in dollar. Global trade moves through dollars. Central banks stockpile dollars as reserves. If faith in the US breaks, the shock travels instantly. Stock markets plunge, interest rates spike, mortgages get more expensive, retirement accounts lose value. Even if you live in London, Toronto, or Sydney, your financial life is tied to Washington's political theater. Think about this in personal terms. You're a Canadian saving for retirement. Your pension fund holds US bonds because they're considered safe. A default hits. Suddenly, those bonds aren't safe anymore. Your retirement fund takes a hit. Or maybe you're in the UK with a mortgage. The default makes global interest rates rise. Your monthly payments go up even if British politics are stable. Or you're in Australia running a business. A default crushes global demand, the Aussie dollar drops, and your exports lose value. That's why this crisis matters to everyone, not just Americans. But let's zoom out. Why does America even have a debt ceiling? Most countries don't. In the UK, Canada, and Australia, passing a budget automatically allows the borrowing to fund it. America created the debt ceiling during World War I to give the Treasury flexibility without asking Congress for permission every time. But over time, it turned into a political football. Critics say it's outdated and dangerous. It doesn't control spending because spending is already decided in the budget. Instead, it creates artificial crises. Defenders argue it forces America to confront its massive debt, more than $34 trillion and rising. But using the ceiling as a hostage is like threatening to burn down your house to teach yourself not to overspend. So what happens if Congress doesn't act? Some say the Treasury could prioritize payments, paying bondholders first and delaying everyone else. But that still means millions of Americans miss checks. Others argue the president could invoke the 14th Amendment, which says the validity of US debt shall not be questioned. That would bypass Congress, but spark a constitutional crisis on top of a financial one. Then there's the infamous $1 trillion coin idea. Technically, the government could mint a platinum coin worth $1 trillion, deposit it at the Federal Reserve, and use it to pay bills. It sounds absurd, but legally it might be possible. Still, markets wouldn't take it seriously, and trust would erode even faster. Here's the global angle. Every time America flirts with default, rivals like China and Russia smile. They want the world to doubt the dollar. They want alternatives like the digital yuan, gold, or regional currencies to look safer. If the US ever truly defaulted, it would hand them a propaganda victory, proof that the dollar isn't reliable. That could accelerate the shift away from US dominance in global finance. And once that momentum starts, it's hard to reverse. Now, it's important to be realistic. The US will probably avoid default, just like it always has. Politicians will argue, markets will panic, and at the last minute, the ceiling will be raised. Investors will breathe a sigh of relief. Life will go on. But here's the thing, every showdown leaves scars. Each one erodes trust a little more, each one makes the world a little more nervous. One day, the game could spiral too far, and the unthinkable might happen. If that day comes, the shockwave would dwarf the 2008 financial crisis. Let's talk scenarios. In a short default, where payments are missed for just a few days, markets would panic but recover, though America's reputation would take permanent damage. In a long default, lasting weeks or months, the consequences would be catastrophic. The stock market could crash by double digits. Banks could freeze lending. The US dollar could lose its reserve currency status. And for ordinary people, it would mean job losses, collapsing pensions, and skyrocketing costs. The chaos wouldn't stop at America's borders. It would ripple into every country tied to the dollar, which is basically all of them. So what's the lesson for people outside the US? It's a reminder that no system, no matter how strong, is invincible. Diversifying your savings, avoiding too much personal debt, and being aware of global risks aren't just buzzwords. They're survival strategies. And for policymakers around the world, it's a warning. Depending so heavily on one country's currency is risky. Maybe the future will bring a multipolar system with multiple safe assets instead of just the dollar. But until then, the world remains tied to America's political roller coaster. What if the world's richest country suddenly couldn't pay its bills? It's not science fiction. It's the risk we all face every time Washington plays games with the debt ceiling. It may look like boring politics, but in truth, it's a fuse connected to the heart of the global economy. And every time that fuse gets lit, the world holds its breath, hoping it doesn't explode.